it's interesting because I think I'm at the stage in life, and as are many people that are probably listening, that children are starting to become more of an option. It's the kind of, you know, that weird crux between like 24 and 28 where children become, they're more of an option. It's more of a priority, you know, especially amongst women, but men as well.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people have this real anxiety about parenting. And I suppose the first question that I really love to ask you is, what do parents get wrong when raising their children?
Everything. I mean, so it's such an interesting question because, and it's something I'm a bit obsessed by, because I think parents get things right, parents get things wrong, and I think all of that, the right and the wrong, is really important for children. And I think one of the things that's really gone wrong in our society is that we seem to have this bizarre kind of trope in the Western world that parents have got to be perfect. And I think that's a disaster for children. And to be honest, one of the things that I've become really, really focused on in my research is it shouldn't just be parents. It should be parents, it should be grannies, it should be neighbours, it should be aunties.
The whole network.
The whole network. I mean, it takes a village to raise a child. So I'm Scottish. I grew up in Scotland, but I've got a big extended family in the Caribbean, and I work really closely with a colleague called Ruchika Gajwani, who is Indian. She's actually in India just now, and it was lovely this morning because we were literally on a Zoom with her, and she was in her childhood home, and she was describing how that, when she was growing up, was just full of family.
That's amazing.
And we've lost that. So for me, we need to stop blaming parents and be able to say to parents, look, do you know what? It's okay to get things wrong, because then kids are going to learn that life is full of rough and tumble and people muck up sometimes, and, you know, it's not going to traumatise you.
Well, parenting's hard, and I think that you're right, having that network around you is really, really important. I think in the UK where maybe it's going, I don't want to say wrong, because wrong is not the answer, but people are having children later and later, and as a result, they probably have less family, like statistically, because their parents are maybe no longer there.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, maybe that's part of it. I think it's more than that, though. I think it's got to do with our focus on the nuclear family. The weather means that we tend to stay indoors a lot. I mean, you and I, we were just talking about a picture of Norway. Yeah. The Norwegians have got even worse weather than we do, but somehow they manage to get out and about. They're always out in their, you know, in their fantastic outdoor clothing. We tend to be between our own, you know, within our own four walls. And I think what then happens is that you end up with this really kind of intense world of parents and children together. And somehow increasingly over the decades, we've lost that thing of just, you know, you give your children a piece and jam in the morning and you let them roam. And so I think our children have got much less experience of just being out and about and roaming the neighbourhood and being kind of batted back by neighbours who know them. And maybe that is partly that there's a bigger distance between the generations, but I don't think it's just that. I don't know what you think.
Is it fear? Like when I think of when I was younger, I mean, we kind of briefly touched on this before. When I think of when I was younger, there was no social media, right? So, and as a parent looking on the news, it's never positive. It's
That's
always,
right.
you know, it's never positive. No matter where you go on the news, they're going to thrive
right.
off of negativity. And I think that as a parent, then you will start thinking the worst case scenario. Right. If I let my kid out to the park, someone's going to snap him.
Yeah. I think that's huge. And actually, if you look at the statistics, I mean, certainly in our area, you know, you were much more likely to have your child snatched in the 1950s than you would now. I mean, you know, the world has actually got a lot safer, except for cars. Obviously, there's a lot more cars on the road. And that is a problem, because I think people are worried about their children crossing the roads.
Yeah.
But I do think there's paranoia about safety, because we love negative news. We don't like good news. And then also I think that's kind of spawned a kind of feeling within statutory services that you've got to kind of reduce risk to zero. But
to live is having risk.
Exactly. And to be honest, I think risk is really important for children's development. You know, you're not going to learn to read a map unless you've ever been out and about. You know, but seriously, I mean, it's a good example. My husband's American, and he's a bit more risk embracing than most British people. And when my kids were growing up, we're very lucky where we live. We live near the Kelvin Walkway, so they can ride the bikes. And so my kids were quite used to kind of navigating, You know, they would cycle down the Kelvin Walkway, they'd lock their bikes by Kelvin Bridge, they'd jump on the tube into town. And I remember at the age of, when my daughter was about 15, she wanted to go to a dance class, which meant crossing George Square. And one of my friends' daughter wanted to go. And she said, oh, but who's going to drop them off and pick them up? And I'm thinking, oh, it's not going to be me. I'm going to be doing something else. That was an hour back for me, do you know? But literally this girl, my daughter's friend, didn't know how to get from Buchanan. I mean, for those who are not in Glasgow, believe me, getting from Buchanan Street Underground to the Scottish Youth Theatre is probably the safest. It's like, what? I don't know, like a few hundred yards across George Square, which has probably got more CCTV than anywhere in the world. You couldn't, I mean, it's just incredibly safe, but she literally didn't know how to make that journey. And it's just a diagonal across the square.
Is that because of you think that's because of the security that the parent, I say security?
She'd just been picked up and dropped off everywhere because of the fear. You know, you use the word fear. I think that's absolutely spot on. We've become a very kind of fearful, risk-averse society.
Do you think that leads to more, I mean, attachment is a big thing, right? Attachment with parents. That probably leads to more attachment disorders down the line.
So, first of all, I wouldn't use the term attachment disorders because that's a very specific thing. And attachment, insecure attachment difficulties perhaps. Right. Attachment disorders is what you get when you've been abused and neglected. Right. But so attachment is really just about learning to deal with your stress responses. So attachment in a young infant, attachment behaviours are where the young infant reaches out to be picked up or cries, and they're basically signalling to the parent or to the granny, because actually originally attachment was a community focused thing. So they're signalling, somebody who loves me, come and pick me up and sort my problem out. I need attention, I've got a sore tummy, just sort my problem out. So that's what that's all attachment is. It's just about bringing caregivers close to sort your problems out. And I think one of the problems that can arise is if we try to make there never be any problems. So obviously when a baby's 6 weeks old, they need the parent to be doing pretty much everything for them. I mean, that's just obvious. But
for a guy, it's when they're 21.
Well, exactly. You said it. But by the time you're 3 or 4, in certain did you ever see that? There was a documentary about Japanese kids that were getting sent on errands at the age of sort of 3 or 4.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, there are societies where at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, kids will just be going and
doing things.
Yeah, doing things.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you're going to encounter difficulties that you're going to have to sort out for yourself. So gradually there's a process where you start to manage your own stress responses. And I think the problem, you're kind of joking about, some guys don't get it, till their mid-20s, but I actually think it's not just guys these days. A lot of young people go to university and they've been picked up and dropped off. They've not been able to take risks. And there's going to be a lot that they haven't navigated for themselves.
And you do find that, so I never got into university, but I got into college. So for anyone listening that's American, it's almost like the extension of school. It's the place you go before you get into university. And I found the most crazy people at college were the ones that hadn't been allowed out yet.
That's it.
They were the ones from the Outer Hebrides that had never seen a city before.
Yes.
And they go out and they have no idea how to control, and they just go mental. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens with a lot of children. And you kind of see the patterns in school. There was always a couple of guys or a couple of girls that were just kind of crazy. They couldn't control their drink, they kept drinking, they do drugs. Do you think the reason for that in part is maybe because they have been more suppressed when they're younger?
It's so hard to tell, but yeah, I mean, I noticed that when I went to university. I remember I went to university quite young. I was 17, but I also had been to a big state secondary school. And I mean, this is back in the day. You wouldn't get away with it now without a fake ID, but me and my friends, we'd been going to pubs probably since we were about 14. And so you make your mistakes then.
Yeah.
And going to university, there were a lot of kids that had been, I'm stereotyping here, but it was often kids who'd been to private schools who maybe had been looked after in a different way. And they were often the ones that went wild, So there's a really interesting book called Wildhood. So anyone who's interested in this, it's by Barbara Natterson Horowitz, I think. It's really such a brilliant book. And it's about adolescence across species. Okay. And they start off literally in the introduction of the book. They talk about adolescent sea otters. And apparently there's somewhere on off the coast of Florida, I think. Is it Florida or is it somewhere in California? It doesn't matter. But anyway, there's somewhere on the American coast that's so dangerous that it's just the sea is almost bare because no one dares go there because of the great white sharks.
Oh, right, okay.
Except for adolescent sea otters and they describe it as they joyride into the danger zone. And if they survive, and most of them do, the great majority of them get away with it. If they survive, they have much better stress response systems.
Wow. Because they're putting themselves in such a stressful position.
So what they're arguing, so Barbara Natterson-Horowitz is, I think she started off as a cardiologist, and she teamed up with an anthropologist whose name is escaping me. Doesn't matter. I think I've given your listeners enough information to go and look it up. It's a great book. But she was asked to go to basically sort out the heart disease of chimpanzees at the Chicago Zoo. And she began to think, chimpanzees are not that different from humans. So she got really interested in kind of comparative biology. And one of the things she found most interesting was this whole concept of adolescence. And I think, a lot of people have argued that adolescence is a pretty human thing. We kind of nurture our kids and we give them a chance to become adults. And she's like, no, actually, across species, it's the time between the moment that you're physically mature but you're not psychologically mature yet. So you're big, you actually, God forbid, if you already start having sex, you'd probably be big enough to be having kids. But you're actually not sensible enough because you've not a chance to make mistakes. So she argues, or they argue, the authors argue that making mistakes and mucking up is a natural adolescent thing, and it's really important in actually growing to maturity.
Was testing your stress responses.
Exactly.
And if you don't get a chance to do that when you're younger, you're going to do it probably when you're older, and you won't know what to do when that stress response hits.
That's right.
What are the type? I think I've seen, maybe you were talking about it on the podcast, but the types of stress response is fight or flight, right? Or freeze.
So we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, but actually, I don't know why certain people do one or the other. And maybe we all do them at different times. But essentially what happens when you get really a sudden stress, so God forbid if a big truck crashed into this building, you and I, we would basically, what would happen is we'd have a big outpouring of cortisol and adrenaline as stress hormones, and then our sympathetic nervous system. So you've got an autonomic nervous system that's got kind of two arms. So the sympathetic is the one that kind of gets you ready for fight, flight, and freeze. So that would basically kick in, and your heart rate would go up, your face would flush. Hopefully, if a truck came in, I hope it would be flight and we'd just run and get out of this way. But maybe a better example is if you crash your car. Some people will actually immediately get out of the car and start shouting at the other person, which is fight. Some people will think, oh my God, the police are going to come and they'll leg it.
Do a runner, aye.
And then I think the freeze, the way I imagine the freeze is that you're actually kind of playing dead, so that like if it was a lion, hopefully they think you were dead already and not eat you. So, yeah, I don't know enough about it to know why you have one of those responses in different circumstances, but they're all actually really useful ways of keeping you safe in different stressful circumstances. And then, assuming you don't get eaten, and you're still alive, then your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and just kind of slows you down enough to start thinking. So, it's a really beautifully kind of sensitive system that really serves as well, I think.
Is there a correlation between neurodiversity?
Neurodivergence, I would call it.
Divergence.
Yes.
Neurodivergence and stress response.
Yes. So neurodivergence. Let's settle into another topic. So neurodivergence, and it's interesting because the language is really changing. We used to talk about individual diagnoses more than anything else. So ADHD, autism, tic disorders, which includes Tourette's. Do you know about Tourette's? That's
Yeah.
And also intellectual disabilities of various kinds. So they're all types of neurodivergence. And the way that we conceptualise them now, they're not mental health problems at all. They're basically different types of temperament, really. But the reason we call them neurodivergence is that you're kind of at the more extreme end of the kind of the spectrums, if that makes any sense. So I actually have a diagnosis of ADHD, which I got when I was 54, to my then 80-year-old mother's hilarity, because she was like, I could have told you that. When you were 3. ADHD is essentially symptoms or traits of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and poor concentration. And so if you think about ADHD, you can imagine that makes it more challenging to kind of manage your stress responses. So if you're someone who is likely to be distracted by all sorts of things going on, you might not notice that the lion's coming and get more of a fright. I mean, that's a really silly way to put it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there is evidence that people who are neurodivergent are at higher risk of kind of stress-related problems.
Well, you can understand why, because if you need to focus on something but you physically can't focus, there's an exam coming up, you're on a time frame, but you keep jumping between, eventually it's going to hit 2 a.m. and you think, oh, and this happens to me.
Exactly.
So I got diagnosed when I was like 9, 10.
Oh, right.
But I also got diagnosed with dyslexia. So I got the double pronger, which is great. Yeah. But that's a definite trait that I've found, is that I will literally leave things until an hour before.
Me too.
And then be like, shit, I need to do this. And then you hyper focus.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right.
It's have you heard of low latent inhibition?
I've heard of it, but you need to explain it to me.
It's super interesting. And I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole when I knew you were coming in. I was doing some research. And if you can imagine, like 4 blocks are on the table. So you've got 4 glasses of water here. Someone that is neurotypical, if you tell them to focus on block 2, they'll focus on block 2. And that's what they'll do. Someone that has ADHD goes block 2, block 3, block 2, block 4, block 2, block 4. And they can't really...
That's me.
Whereas that's me as well. Whereas someone with low latent inhibition, they focus on all 4 blocks at the same time, and they can't focus on the one. And they're analysing everything. Wow. So...
Is that more common in autism?
Yes. So interestingly, someone with low latent inhibition that has a lower IQ, and when I say lower IQ, kind of normal, almost always results in autistic traits.
Interesting. Oh, I'm going to read up about this.
So
I love learning something new.
But someone with an extraordinarily high IQ that has low latent inhibition almost always results in creative genius, because they will analyze everything. So if you were to come into a room, they'd be everywhere, whereas you're on me right now.
How interesting.
Super interesting.
It's fascinating. So the thing that I love about the whole area of neurodivergence, so I've worked for many years, decades now, with Chris Gilberg. So Chris Gilberg is really, I would say, the world leader on autism and ADHD. And he was the first person in 2010 to basically state that neurodevelopmental conditions overlap. And I mean, that was a really, really important thing to say, because it came from all his epidemiology. He had all these cohorts of people who'd been followed up to adulthood with ADHD, autism, eating disorders. And he began to realise that actually they were all interlinked.
Yeah.
And so what he's developed this approach that we call the Essence approach. And I really like the term Essence. It's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it stands for Early Symptomatic Syndromes, eliciting neurodevelopmental clinical examinations. So, Essence. But essentially what he's saying is that when parents or professionals think there's a problem with a child, a developmental problem, and it could be almost anything. It could be my child doesn't sleep and everyone else's child sleeps. Or... my child is already running about and breaking things and is only 11 months old. Why is nobody else's child walking yet?
Yeah.
Or it could be, why is my child only focused on the mobile above their cot and not giving me eye contact? Probably there's going to be neurodivergence, but you won't yet know what it is. And actually, usually it'll be more than one thing. So people with ADHD often have autistic traits. People who are autistic often have ADHD. It's really quite common, or traits of those. So actually it's all one big kind of genetic lump that's transmitted in families in really interesting ways. So it's been a fascinating area. And since 2010, there's just been such an explosion of research. And one of the really exciting things I think about that area is that neurodivergence can just mean that someone's exceptional. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got any problems at all.
I think that's an issue. Like, I think a lot of people that research this, they see it as a real negative.
Yeah.
They go, I have ADHD, therefore I can't do
That's
X, Y, Z.
right.
Whereas back in the day, you didn't have the diagnosis.
Yes.
So people with ADHD they were expected to do what a neurotypical person would do.
Yeah.
And I think people, especially when you've got this social media generation, a lot of people thrive on the negativity again. I've got ADHD, my life's really hard.
That's right.
And I can't do these things. And I'm not saying that ADHD can't make your life slightly more difficult or challenging, but a lot of the time it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, dyslexia has led to pattern recognition. So a lot of people with dyslexia will have amazing pattern recognition.
My husband's dyslexic, and his recall of song lyrics is quite incredible, and I'm sure it's linked in some way.
Yeah.
He just maybe he's more attuned to listening because he finds the reading difficult. I don't know, but with I think usually with so-called deficits, there are nearly always strengths on the flip side. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. Particularly in psychiatry, we have only focused on the deficits. And so, it's amazing if you look on Google Scholar at, what are the strengths of ADHD, autism, etc., you find hardly anything because there's not been the research done. And yet, if you work in this field, it's really obvious that, academia is full of neurodivergent people. Business is full of neurodivergent people. Politics. I was on a cross-party group recently, and there were all these MSPs and, really quite a lot of those,
like senior,
politicians, senior ministers, for example. It's really quite common for people to be kind of now being quite open about either they're neurodivergent or their kids are neurodivergent. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because often these, I suppose that, these traits that are at the kind of extreme end of the distribution, they often make people exceptional. So do you see it as a kind of extreme deficit? Do you see it as exceptional? And it's probably both in some, in different ways.
Yeah, like a neurotypical person couldn't necessarily do what a, minorly autistic person could do, or an ADHD person. It's interesting the way you describe that, though, like they're interlinked. Because I feel like people, especially in society, they want to put things like in a box.
I know.
They're like, you have ADHD, but actually you might have like 3 different things working at the same time.
Exactly. And I think the way I try to describe it when I talk to students about this is, if you think of the traits that make up ADHD, so I've just mentioned 3. So there's 3 of those. With autism, we talk about challenges with language and social communication and repetitive and stereotype behaviours, and then there's also sensory sensitivities. So there's at least 3 or 4 things that would come together to make you autistic. You only need 4 numbers for your cash line number or your auto teller number if you're American, and that gives you 10,000 different combinations. So that's why we all only have 4 numbers that we're going to plug into the auto teller machine. But if you think of autism and ADHD and just those groups of symptoms, you've already got 7 or 8. So if you put them together, how many tens of thousands of combinations
it's like a cocktail
do you have?
Yeah.
So the beautiful thing about it is, and this is something Chris Gilbert really taught me. I remember a light going on when he said this. He said 2 people with autism are as different from each other as 2 people who are not autistic are from each other. And it's so obvious when you think about it. But one of the problems that we get into is, a teacher in a class might say, well, there was a boy with autism in last year's class and she's different, so she can't be autistic. When in fact, autism manifests in so many different ways. ADHD manifests in so many different ways. And if we can understand, it's not about the diagnosis, it's about what's inside the tin.
Yeah. It's not one size fits all. Everything's very, very different.
That's right.
Chisholm Hunter are the sponsors of the Into the Mind podcast, and without Chisholm Hunter, we would not be sitting here today. Honestly, if you like luxury watches or luxury diamonds, Chisholm Hunter is the place to go. Amongst the luxury watch industry at the moment, there's tons of fakes kicking around, which is a really dangerous place to be. You do not want to buy a fake watch and get conned into buying a fake watch. And that's why people normally go to authorized retailers. Now, Chisholm Hunter is an authorized retailer, and they're authorized retailers for Omega, Tudor, Vacheron Constantin, Blancpain, Breguet. The list goes on and on and on. So if you want to buy a watch safe and securely, then head to chisholmhunter.co.uk. To top that off, they're also family run, and they've been going for over 165 years, which is pretty awesome. So head to chisholmhunter.co.uk for a luxury watch or your next luxury diamond. And while you're there, use the discount code CHSUB, that is CHSUB, for an exclusive discount on selected lines. That is chisholmhunter.co.uk, that is chisholmhunter.co.uk. And on that note, let's get back to the podcast. Is there a way of telling, like, I'm thinking back to school, there was a couple of people in my school that were, we didn't know it at the time, but they were autistic or Asperger's.
Yeah, so Asperger's is now incorporated. I mean, you would now, somebody with who would 10 years ago be diagnosed with Asperger's would now be diagnosed as autistic.
All right, so it's under the same umbrella.
It's under the same umbrella, yep.
Right, okay. So back then, at like 9-10 years old, we wouldn't really know. We would know that there was differences there, but we wouldn't really know that they were autistic. How would a mother or a father know if their son or daughter is displaying those traits?
So I think, to be honest, I think parents generally do know. So that's what I loved about Chris's 2010 paper, because really what he was arguing for was, if a parent says there's something different about my child, we should be listening. But then, of course, it's kind of back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. That's not really going to work if you only ever get to see your own child. So
you think they're different, even though...
Well, no, it's more... I mean, I think one of the problems is, if we lived in rural Guatemala, for example, I worked in rural Guatemala many, many years ago, so I can pick that as a context that I do actually know. You know, people live in village societies. It's hot. The kids are all playing out. All the adults kind of know all the kids and they see all the kids, so they will get a sense of the kind of range of normal, if that makes sense. You know, that kids come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So a parent who has a child that's really different from any other child they've ever met will be able to be really confident about that. My child is really different. In our society, that's maybe a bit more challenging, but we still need to be listening. You know, I think the experience that often happens to parents is, you know, they'll have their baby, they'll maybe start meeting up with friends who've got babies of the same age, they'll go for coffees, and they're sitting there, you know, there's one parent that's sitting there thinking, yeah, my child's not doing all the stuff that everybody else's child is doing. There's something different. And gradually that feeling of there's something different about my child grows and grows and grows, and eventually they'll discuss it with a professional, often their health visitor. A health visitors are really important professionals because they see thousands and thousands of children. And often, sometimes it's the health visitor that notices first. They'll say there's something different about that child. And I think all that Chris was really saying in that paper is we should really be listening, because there almost certainly will be something. And so let's imagine it ends up being a child with who's autistic and also has ADHD, and that's quite a common combination. Then what they might notice when the child goes to nursery is that this is a child who doesn't really want to hang out with other kids. I remember actually hearing about a child in nursery who spent most of the playtime looking at the bark of a tree and not playing with other children. So, you know, that's kind of different, isn't it? So what people will start to worry about in the nursery is why this child isn't socialising. And that's often where people start thinking, is this child autistic? Especially if the child then really struggles to kind of get the kind of social rules right. So maybe they're not very good at turn taking in conversations, and you know, they maybe dominate the conversation, or they just barge in and don't let other children take their turn. Don't seem to quite understand the social rules. That's the kind of thing that would start to give people a hint.
Hell, yeah.
Yeah. If that child is also hyperactive, to be honest, you're probably not going to notice in nursery, because it's completely acceptable to be rushing around and trying all the different toys. So that child may well end up with a diagnosis of autism at the age of 3 or 4. Then they go to school at the age of 5, 5.5. And then the teacher's like, this child's never in their seat. They keep interrupting. And then folks start thinking, oh, maybe it wasn't autism. Maybe it's ADHD. Maybe we got it wrong, but they didn't get it wrong. It's just that the developmental challenges are different.
Does it show itself in different ways as the child develops?
Absolutely.
Or are the traits quite uniform in terms of like if it's a struggle with socialization, that's going to be a uniform trait throughout the child's development. Whereas if it's a obsession with, and this is someone in my school, it was like they were obsessed with like trains and train lines. And I remember we were playing Minecraft. You know what Minecraft is?
Yeah.
And everyone was building whatever they wanted to build, and they were building like the train lines in Glasgow. And it was fascinating because they knew to the T.
Yes.
It was unbelievable levels of intelligence. Like they'd studied this. And I suppose, would that remain uniform? Like would that obsession continue?
It's a really great example. So imagine you're a child who, that person, for example, you knew them well enough to realise that this was a kind of consistent obsession with trains, repetitive and stereotyped interest in trains. But actually, somebody else might say at that, when they were at nursery, they were just really interested in that particular toy, and then it became Minecraft. Mm. So it would look like a different obsession, but actually it's the same thing. A better example would be, imagine a child who's got, and this is quite common, a sensory sensitivity to a particular pitch of noise that just really gets them. And at primary school, it's fine because they don't really encounter that particular pitch very often. Then they get to secondary school and they're in a much, much busier environment, and there's fluorescent lights that go. That child may suddenly be absolutely unable to manage school. And they always had that particular sensory sensitivity. It's just that the environment's changed.
Right, okay.
So I think the traits themselves don't change that much over time, but the environment changes, and so they seem to change, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting.
And actually, one of the things in our team that we've become very focused on, I've got a colleague, Dr. Jason Lang, who is a very proudly autistic child psychiatrist, and he won't mind me saying that, and it gives him really wonderful insights. But his view is very much that we need to be understanding children's particular unique profile and then modifying the environment to suit. And we really don't do that. So I don't know what school was like for you as somebody with ADHD. For me, as a little girl with ADHD, and I don't know whether this is biological or whether it's kind of social determinism, I really don't, but little girls behave. And so my parents were apparently really scared about me going to school because I was really naughty. And they thought she's going to be a disaster. But I wasn't. I sat with my arms folded and I would be a good girl. And then I would get a migraine almost every Saturday morning because it was such an effort for me. Mm. And when I look back, what would really have helped me in primary school would have been if every 20 minutes we got to run round the building.
Yeah, expel all that energy.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And I mean, it really amazes me that we expect children, any child actually, to sit, velcroed to the chair for like 5 hours. It's not as bad now. I mean, at least kids get to kind of get up and wander about the classroom. But that's now problematic for autistic kids, because, so remember Jason talking about being in school. I mean, he's quite a bit younger than me, but he's still older than you. And when he was at school was quiet and it was very structured. And his daughter has really struggled because school is no longer structured, and it's even primary schools are really buzzy and busy. And for an autistic child who's got sensory sensitivities, that can be a disaster.
Because they like structure.
Because you may just need structure, routine, quiet. And I do think things are improving. I think we're beginning to realise that there are quite simple things often that can help neurodivergent kids to basically get along with life. And the way, I mean, I noticed, for example, when my kids were small, we used to try and go to this music festival. Neither of my kids are autistic. None of us have got, we're not autistic, but both of my kids had sensory sensitivities. One of my kids has a diagnosis of ADHD, the other not. But they both had real sensory sensitivities. They could not stand music festivals, which was really a shame for me because I love them. But anyway,
specific pitches, or was it just noise?
It was just the general noise.
Right,
it was just too much. So just a few years ago, I was at a music festival with a friend, and I noticed there were all these little kids with ear guards, and we would not have thought of that. So there is a more advanced understanding of the kind of basics of the kind of components of these neurodevelopmental diagnoses, and that a lot of kids can't stand, have sensory sensitivities towards noise, and that there's a simple fix. You just give them headphones and then they can enjoy the music festival. So just understanding what neurodevelopment means for different people in itself is the biggest treatment, I think.
Is it nature or is it nurture? I'm guessing that ADHD or autism or dyslexia is passed down through...
That's nearly all nature, yeah.
Right. So how much of it comes down to nurture?
So it's really interesting, and you're asking the right person, because my research focus has always been abuse and neglect.
Yeah.
And I always kind of assumed that abuse and neglect could cause, psychiatric disorder. It turns out that there are only a couple of psychiatric disorders that can be caused by abuse and neglect, actually. And we did a study. Well, so first of all, I'd noticed two things. I'd noticed that a lot of kids who'd been very severely abused and neglected didn't have any mental health problems at all. And that in itself is amazing. Yeah, so you look surprised.
Well, I would have thought the opposite.
So let's just give you the figures. So we did a study recently where 40% of children coming into foster care in Glasgow and London had a psychiatric disorder. And this is kids under the age of 5. So 40%. Now that is several orders of magnitude higher than the general population, because about 7% of kids under the age of... Actually, when I say a psychiatric disorder, that's not really the right term. It's a diagnosis. So it's a diagnosis of either a neurodivergence or a psychiatric disorder. So 40% in the population of kids who've been abused and neglected, 7% of the general population will have a diagnosis, a diagnosable mental health problem or a neurodevelopmental condition. But what that also means is that 60% of kids coming into foster care, and to come into foster care these days, usually you've had really very significant adversity, often including abuse and neglect. That means 60% don't have a diagnosis. So we shouldn't be surprised that one of the more common outcome of abuse and neglect is not to have a mental health problem.
So does it swing the other way? Are people that are subject to that when they're younger actually more successful in their areas?
Nobody knows that.
Because it's an interesting, because like Elon Musk was subject to horrible shit when he was younger.
I don't know if I'd call him successful. I think he's probably about to...
Well, I think he's going to blow up the world or something. But within business, right? He's created multiple successful. He was PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, crazy stuff, crazy. And just when you look at people that are ultra successful, CEOs of businesses or heads of huge conglomerations, typically they have had big issues when they were young.
So I think there's a story to this. So I started off with, there's two things that I noticed. So the first thing I noticed was that some kids who've been abused and neglected don't have any mental health problems. And I was actually, even though the figures say it, there was a little boy in one of my studies who'd been so badly beaten that he had to be an inpatient in the paediatric ward. And the social worker phoned me up and said, can I see what symptoms he's got, because he must need therapy. And we went over absolutely everything. He had not a single symptom of anything. He was fine. So
oh, that's horrible.
But it's not horrible that he's fine. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, abuse
abuse
and neglect is a human rights violation. It should never have happened. But somehow we need to get that message across that if you're that person that's had that terrible thing happen to you, it doesn't mean that you're going to be damaged for life. It really doesn't. So that's one thing. And it was actually that little boy that really woke me up to this. But then the other thing is that the kids who've been abused and neglected who do have mental health problems tend to have really complex mental health problems. So that really intrigued me. So we did a big study in a twin database from Sweden.
Okay.
And they had collected information on autism, ADHD, tic disorders and intellectual disabilities on all of these kids, like thousands of kids at the age of 9. And then we looked at the kids who'd experienced abuse compared to kids who hadn't experienced abuse. And what we found was that they were much, 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 much more likely to have to basically be neurodivergent. And because it was a twin study, I won't bore you with how, but twin studies can help you understand the causality. And we were able to show that the abuse and neglect hadn't caused the neurodivergence. So, it was absolutely clear. Additional genetic factors had caused both the abuse and neglect and the neurodivergence.
Wow.
Yeah, that was exactly my response. I remember me and my colleague Ruchika, we were literally on Skype, because this was back in 2016 that we got the findings. We were on Skype with our friends, with our colleagues in Sweden. They'd been doing all the behavioural genetics. And Ruchika's mouth was just like a big O. She was like, what? And then I realised I was the same. The two of us were just like, we were so surprised, because I had always assumed that the reason that there was so much complex, ADHD, autism, tic disorders, because the difference was particularly high for the kids with really complex overlapping neurodivergence. I think if you had 3 out of those 4 things, so 3 out of the 4 of ADHD, autism, tic disorders, or intellectual disabilities, it could be any 3 out of the 4, you were nearly 10 times as likely to have been abused.
Wow.
But it wasn't caused by the abuse. So it totally changed my thinking. And Ruchika and I, we both went away. It was a long weekend, and we both came back and we both said, I think I know what this is. We still don't know for certain, but we suspect that it's probably neurodivergence running in the family. So we've always talked about the intergenerational transmission of abuse and neglect. I think probably what's more important is the intergenerational transmission of neurodivergence and how that impacts parent-child relationships. And that's a really interesting one, because we know that parents who are neurodivergent can be better parents of kids who are neurodivergent.
Because they understand the problem.
Exactly. They get the child. It's a great example with me. This is years before I knew I had ADHD, but my son, it's so funny. I used to pick him up from school on a Tuesday. We'd go down to gymnastics. Probably 9 times out of 10, he'd forgotten his gym kit. And I'd be like, oh God, because I'd forgotten as well. And we just stopped by Oxfam. They used to have this 50p bargain bucket, and we'd just get a top. Just wear his school trousers and his top, and we'd go to gymnastics. I never really thought of anything of it. And I look back and I think, oh my God, that's so ADHD. He didn't get diagnosed till he was 14, when he lost both his bike and his school bag in the same day. And I thought, oh, that's no normal. And then he got his diagnosis and he said, listen, Mum, you're just as bad as me. But I think what that shows is I was just so tolerant. We just bumbled along. We got, we had our systems. At one level, I am stupidly organised, but that's because I've learned to keep my lists. I've got my techniques, but I'm really tolerant of that kind of forgetting your school bag type of problem, because I would have done the same. I remember Jason talking about I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling this story. In fact, I know for a fact, he's told me I can tell the story. His daughter said to him, Dad, I really hate looking at people in the eye. It makes me actually feel sick.
Very anxious.
Well, we don't know why it is, but some autistic people cannot bear to look people in the eye. Not everyone, but some autistic people really, it's a very aversive thing. And Jason said, don't worry, I've got a tip, honey. He said, just look between the eyebrows. Said nobody neurotypical will be able to tell the difference. So actually, I think generally, as a clinician, I think neurodivergent parents are generally better parents of neurodivergent children until you introduce major stress in the family. So we've actually been talking a lot about this to parents who've been involved, whose kids have been involved with social work, who've really struggled. And some of those parents have had addictions, for example. Some of them have had their children taken into care and then had them returned and things. We've been working with some really amazing parent collaborators, and we've been discussing this. And the kind of thing they've talked about is, say you're already living in poverty and you are a parent who might not know you've got a diagnosis of ADHD, but you get ADHD, you're more likely to miss your benefits appointment. Then you're going to get sanctioned and you're going to fall even further into poverty, and your child may end up going to school and hasn't had their breakfast because you've run out of food. Before you know it, the social work's saying that you've neglected your child. So there can be a sudden vicious cycle, I think, that can actually.
So it causes it's almost like a spiral.
Yeah.
One part falls, and then because you've got this neurodivergence, the other part falls. And
exactly. So I think, we talk about vicious in our team. And I've got a wonderful colleague, Evie Bally, who did her PhD she now works at Caledonian University, and she's looking further into this. But her PhD was all about what are the causal relationships between ADHD and child maltreatment? What causes what? And actually, we think it's kind of bi-directional. So if you've got ADHD and you're maltreated, you're abused, it's probably going to make your ADHD worse. And you might even go from having traits to actually fulfilling diagnostic criteria. So severe abuse and neglect potentially could actually cause ADHD, but we suspect, and actually the research really seems to be accumulating, that it's more the other direction, that if you've got, I'm sure you and we were probably quite tricky to look after as kids.
I was a terrible child.
So was I.
So I know it now, but I think looking back...
What's your terrible child story? Go on.
Terrible child, everything. I was, I think as a form of rebellion, I was really bad with authority. So any kind of authority, I just two fingers up at them.
Yeah.
And as a result, I would rebel, and I would rebel by doing shit at everything. And that's a really bad trait, because you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because you get out of school, everyone goes to university, and you think, oh, I was the cool guy in school, but now I'm kind of not the cool guy.
It seems to have worked well for you in the end. But
but I suppose I was really lucky that I found something that I really, really loved to hyper focus on. But then that it swings the other way, because you end up hyper focusing on things, and then you leave out quite a lot of other important stuff. Like food has always been an afterthought for me. So I will be starving, but I can't be arsed making food because I want to edit. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and the opposite. And I think it's so interesting with ADHD, because I think you're either a person who forgets to eat or you're a person who forgets to stop. Yeah. The latter. And that was actually what made me want to get diagnosed was, I used to have quite a problem with binge eating. And it's so interesting, getting a diagnosis really made me realise and understand that it was just ADHD, feel less bad about it. And it's really not a problem anymore. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But and that's a really good example of how you can have ADHD and the same trait, which is poor concentration and poor concentration and impulsivity, can make you forget to start eating. It can make me forget to stop eating.
Yeah.
So actually the outcome's opposite. It's the same trait.
It's quite interesting. Have you researched the dopamine and serotonin levels between ADHD and neurotypical?
That's not my area. I mean, I know something about it, but yeah.
It's really interesting because so typically people with ADHD, I'm not sure how it equates to autism, but people with ADHD idle on like a really slightly lower serotonin.
Yes, and people with ADHD are slightly sleepier.
Yeah, so oftentimes, so if a normal neurotypical, I would say, is here,
Such a thing.
ADHD will be here. And as a result, the ADHD person constantly tries to go upward. Yeah. And as a result, they get addicted to stuff. And I've seen it I need to be really careful and really curb what I do, because anything I do will become an addiction.
Yep.
And it's, alcohol was a real problem, smoking or vaping now, or games. Like I will download a game and all of a sudden I will spend 12 hours a day, every day on that game.
Yeah, you got to be careful. Yeah.
It's really bad, but it's because you try and lift back up. And the trick is, for someone that is neurodivergent, finding something that's a healthy way to lift it.
Exactly. With me, my absolute lifesaver is dance. I'm addicted to dancing. I love it. I dance a lot, and it's a real stress reliever for me. But my nightmare baby story is really, I think, illustrative of how difficult it is for parents, because I remember actually years ago, it was the first time that I was going to present these findings, these behavioural genetic findings, at this big Swedish conference, and there was like 1,500 people there. I had the 5 o'clock slot, and I'm thinking, how am I going to... So, I took quite a lot of time explaining those findings to you, and I had like 20 minutes. I thought, they're going to be asleep.
Yeah, how am I going to do
this? I need a story. And I thought, I can't talk about a child. It's going to sound really... I can talk about myself. So I told the sodium amytal story. So this was what my parents used to talk about at parties just for laughs. And they did it very lovingly. But I was such a heinous child. I just didn't sleep. I even remember actually being can't have been older than about 18 months, but I remember looking through the bars of the cot and baby version of just get me out of here, cried and cried
Freedom.
and cried. Yeah. And so they went to the GP. The GP got them prescribed sodium amytal. Now, sodium amytal is like a horse tranquilizer. I mean, you don't even give it to humans now.
Is it ketamine?
No, but it's that kind of thing. It's a real
downer,
real tranquilizer. So they went to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist said, "Oh my God, you can't give this to a baby." So they said, "Phone the doctor." And the pharmacist, they could hear both sides of the conversation. The pharmacist said to the doctor, "This is an adult dose. You can't give this to an 18-month-old." And the doctor said, "You don't know this baby." So they gave it to me. It didn't make any difference to me. It just made me more like kind of drunk and still crying all night. So eventually my mum took it on a Monday night. My dad took it on a Tuesday. She took it on a Wednesday. He took it on a Thursday. So they slept. But I mean, in some ways, the reason I tell that story is that, like my parents, they had a loving marriage. They had enough money. They had actually grandparental support. They had lovely neighbours. But I think if any of those things hadn't been in place, they might have abused me because, I mean, they were absolutely at the end of their tether.
And it's tiredness.
Tiredness, extreme stress.
Yeah, tiredness changes. It
really
really
changes people.
It changes me. I've become a grumpy twat. When
Everybody
I'm tired.
becomes a grumpy twat when they're tired.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. So since I've been presenting these results at conferences, it's not uncommon to have people come up to me and say, "I've never told anyone this before, but I had to actually lock myself in the bathroom because I thought I was going to hit my child." And I think that's a lot more common than we realise because, of course, nobody wants to hurt their children. And child abuse is a terrible thing and it shouldn't happen. So it's a taboo. But actually, we need to be acknowledging that some children are really, really challenging to parent. And the logical conclusion is we need to be offering support to those parents. So it's really changed my view as a child psychiatrist. Because I think, I started in child psychiatry in the kind of early 2000s. And at that time, I think we were we're still quite parent blaming actually as a society.
Oh, we're totally parent blaming.
Yeah.
We're totally parent blaming. Even when it comes to people that are 18 to 24, it's still the parents' fault.
Mm-hmm. Everything's the parents' fault.
And a lot of the time is the child, or not a child anymore, but has just gone out and done something stupid. But our brains aren't fully developed until we're 24. They're gonna do it, and it's not the parents' fault. It's that the brain is not developed of the small man or woman that's doing it.
Well, it's that whole wildhood thing that I was talking about. You've got to make mistakes, and that's how you learn. But there is a real trope in our society that it's all the parents' fault. Do you know that old Philip Larkin poem? Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
Well, there's that old poem. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They didn't mean to, but they did, or something like that. And I hate that. I hate it. Because it's just not true. It is just not true. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have, and occasionally this does happen, you have parents who've really, really abused their kids. And there are psychiatric disorders that can arise from that. So there's, we mentioned attachment disorders at the beginning. Reactive attachment disorder and disinhibited social engagement disorder. They are the two psychiatric disorders that are thought to be caused by abuse and neglect. And you want to avoid those. So reactive attachment disorder, you end up with a kind of, the child or the adult ends up with a kind of shutting down of the attachment system, and they don't seek help, they don't seek support, and they don't accept help. And we did a study in a prison a couple of years ago, and we found that actually it's not uncommon. It's about 11% of prisoners seem to have that disorder, which makes sense because if no one's helped you, if you've not, if the disorder's prevented you letting anyone in to help you develop your stress responses, then you're probably going to burst out.
And often,
yeah, exactly. And then the other attachment disorder is called disinhibited social engagement disorder. Doesn't exactly rung off the tongue. DSED. But that is where people are indiscriminate. So they'll just kind of wander up to anyone in the street. I hate to say this, but you sometimes see this with people who are begging in the street. They're like your best mate. Do you know? And if you kept the conversation going, they'd be coming home with you, and you've just met them. And that is indiscriminate behaviour. And it's quite dangerous behaviour for children. If children are indiscriminate, they can end up been like picked off by predators.
Because they trust anyone.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, luckily predators are quite rare, but they're really good at picking out the kids that are vulnerable. And the vulnerability is often that they're kind of gormless and indiscriminate. And, you know, they will actually go when someone says, come and see my puppy.
It's funny that you get people, like I've got friends that just always seem to get themselves into trouble. And I think it is part of that. I think they just they don't have a radar for what someone's agenda is.
Sometimes that can just be neurodivergence, though.
I mean, potentially, yeah, you're trying to dopamine hit on something you shouldn't. I don't know what, yeah. Sometimes, like, we'll know. I mean, if you're an ADHD type of person, then that impulsivity you can end up doing kind of daft things. And there is good research that shows that, you know, life events happen to people with ADHD, positive and negative. You know, we're more likely to fall out of trees. We're more likely to end up under a bus because we didn't stop and think not to cross the road at that moment. Yeah. We're probably more likely to get punched in the pub because we might think that guy's an idiot and say it rather than keep it to ourselves. Yeah.
Autistic people sometimes don't quite gauge the social situation and may say or do things that will annoy other people.
Come across as offensive when they didn't mean to be. Yeah.
So sometimes those kind of things can lead to people ending up having a lot of bad things happen. But in addition, if you've also been abused and neglected, I mean, DSED is about the same prevalence as autism, so it's not hugely common. It's an additional thing because you know, these are the kind of people who, you know, somebody will say, let's go and rob that gas station, you go first. And they'll be like, great. I want to be their pal.
Am I right in saying that if you are abused when you're young, your brain develops faster than if you weren't?
I think there's something in that. Now, I don't think we know that for certain because a lot of the research, I mean, let's face it, the main way of proving whether an intervention has had an effect is to do a randomised controlled trial. And thank goodness we don't do randomised controlled trials in which we abuse kids.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll never be certain.
Yeah.
But I think there is something in that. I remember years ago reading a paper where someone talked about pseudo-maturity in abused kids. And at the time I thought it was a pseudo-maturity, but I now wonder. I mean, it's actually something I'm quite interested to try and find out because I've come across, like, I can think of one young guy that I know who got a diagnosis of DSED and has actually had quite a lot of problems with his indiscriminate behaviour. He's an adopted guy, and I know he's got a wonderful family, and he'll be okay. But I remember him as a kid. He already had a gardening business by the age of 11.
That's what I'm talking. So a lot of, and it comes back to that, or the CEO kind of business people, ultra successful. A lot of the time, because they've come from broken homes, they've had to mature faster.
Yeah.
Because if they want out the situation, they've got to figure it out. And they kind of come off the back of that. A lot of them then have jobs when they're 15 years old. And they work their way up and they work like shit and they make sure that they don't fall back into the poverty that they were in prior. I think there's something to that.
I've been doing this lecture recently, just a couple of times, but just to be deliberately provocative, that I've called Life's a Bitch and Then You Thrive. Because I think there's something in that, and it does seem to be, you kind of alluded to it earlier, I think it is almost like a tale of two halves. It's like, I'm sure it's not as simple as that, but obviously there are some people who've been abused and neglected who end up with terrible, complex, overlapping mental health problems, and they end up and can end up in addictions, etc. And then at the other extreme, you do seem to sometimes meet people who've had terrible experiences and who are just extraordinary. I mean, there's an amazing book called Ootlin. I don't know how... I haven't seen it talked about much. It should be on the bestseller list. It's one of the most incredible books I've read in the last couple of years. And it's a memoir by a woman called Jenny Fagan.
What was it called again?
Ootlin. Ootlin. Ootlin.
I'll get that.
She's from the east of the country. But she was in the care system from quite young, really, really had a terrible, terrible time. both before she went into care, and then unfortunately she had a really, really negative experience in the care system as well. She's got her PhD. She's a really successful writer. She's also written an amazing book of fiction called The Panopticon. I would really recommend that as well. I mean, brilliant writer. And but reading Utlin and reading her experience, you really get a sense of that. She just really, really had to learn how to look after herself. But I think there's another factor that kind of comes into this, and clearly Jenny Fagan has a brain the size of a planet. I've never had the great pleasure of being in the same room as her. We've actually corresponded a bit. I'd love to meet her, but she's clearly hugely intelligent, and I think sometimes kids who are exceptionally bright and have difficult experiences, sometimes I've no idea what Jenny's neurodevelopmental profile is, and goodness knows, I'm not suggesting anything about that, but sometimes who are also neurodivergent are actually able to really pull themselves out, become mature, and be really exceptional. But I think part of that becoming really exceptional is about finding people who can help. So, often those people who are really, and I mean, I wasn't joking when I said, is Elon Musk successful? Because Elon Musk is doing a hell of a lot of damage to the world at the moment. So, what is success? But somebody like Jenny Fagan and many other examples, Lem Sissay, for example, the poet, he's also written an amazing memoir of being in the care system. These are extraordinary people. They've been successful in their friendships, their relationships, and often what's really helped them has been meeting people who can actually help them get a different view of the world. It's often a positive relationship. Sometimes it's a positive relationship with a foster carer or adoptive parent. Sometimes it's later in life, and it's been lucky enough to meet a romantic partner who
helps,
who really helps. And I don't know that they necessarily help. It's not that person is there to fix you, not at all. It's just perhaps that they give you a different filter on the world.
Yeah, or if you didn't have let's say a father or a mother figure, they could potentially feed into that a little bit.
I don't know. I think that can be a negative thing. I mean, you don't want to be kind of, and I think in a romantic relationship, you want there to be an equality in the partnership. But I just think sometimes it's about people who are really expert in PTSD, and that's not my kind of area of expertise, but obviously it skirts the area that I'm interested in and it is really interesting. They sometimes talk about if you develop post-traumatic stress disorder, say you'd been, suddenly your country went to war, and so you'd had a good upbringing, you'd had a nice childhood, and then suddenly the world is traumatic. Then it can actually change your view. It can change your kind of internal schema. You could have, at the age of 10, in your kind of happy place, be thinking, people are nice, the world's a good place, generally things will work out for me. And then before you know it, war has happened, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and your internal schema could be, actually, people are quite nasty, the world is not a good place, and things are probably going to go wrong. Now, probably neither of those things are completely true. It's somewhere in the middle. And I just wonder whether, if someone who's had a very kind of traumatic upbringing meets someone with that first view, meet someone who's got that kind of sunny view of life, maybe it just makes you come into the middle a bit and realise, maybe my schema are somewhere in the middle.
It rubs off on you a bit.
I mean, I've got no evidence for that. I'm just speculating.
Well, you think so? I think that people make them, I don't want to say mistake, because oftentimes people can take that out of context, but people make the, when they're dating specifically, they find someone that's similar to themselves. And actually, a lot of the time, that's not a good thing, because if they're the same as you, then you can't grow together because you have the same weaknesses.
Yes.
And a lot of the time, I see this a lot with, my friends are all starting to pair off and get married, and a lot of the time they find someone that's either very similar to them or very similar to their mother.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's almost like you choose someone based on what you know.
Or women find someone who's very similar to their father. I've noticed that as well. Yeah.
Why? So is that just because is that comfortability? Is that
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Well, there is actually this there is this genetic phenomenon called assortative mating. So it has actually been shown. It's not my expertise either, but I remember being at a seminar and we were talking about assortative mating, which is where people are attracted to someone who's similar. And now my husband is a white American.
She's different.
And I was about to snort and say, you're joking. My husband's completely different. And then I realised me and my husband have got identically sized feet and hands. To the extent they keep nicking my trainers. So it's actually true.
Yeah.
And actually, in some ways, our facial features look quite similar too. So there is something in that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And we also, I think it's been shown, again, this is just stuff I've read, but it's been shown that we do tend to go for someone who's sort of around the same level of intelligence, I think. And I don't know whether that's also true of kind of social intelligence, social intelligence, emotional intelligence. I don't know, but, I think we do tend to be attracted by people who are like us in many ways.
I wonder if, leading back to the kind of childhood trauma thing, I wonder if neurotypical people marry into other neurotypical people, whereas someone with ADHD would marry someone with ADHD, and that then becomes an issue with the child. Not an issue. Issue is not the word, but yeah.
Yeah. I've wondered about that, and I don't know whether there's any research on that. But you do. It's really, really common to have families where there's lots and lots of neurodivergence, and whether that's just because these genes do get passed down anyway, or whether assortative mating has a role in that as well, I don't know. Certainly. So my husband has a diagnosis of ADHD as well. I hope he wouldn't mind me saying that. So out of the 4 of us in our family, 3 of us have got a diagnosis. My daughter doesn't, and I think she's got a lot of the traits, but none of the problems at all.
She got lucky.
Yeah, she's got the high energy. Do you know what I mean? She can multitask like crazy. So I think there's something in that. There is something about these things kind of clustering in families, and it maybe is partly because we're attracted to each other. Certainly one of the things I've always loved about my husband is, I realise now it's impulsivity. We make quick decisions. I remember when we bought a house, you were just talking earlier about, buying a house and then having to furnish it. We were exactly the same. And I remember really fun so long ago, but it was really fun. We're like, oh my God, we've got to get a fridge and we've got to get a freezer. And we just measured the spaces. We went to like 2 shops and within 15 minutes we bought them. That was it. Done. Tick. Do you know, and just being able to do that kind of quick stuff, we don't muck about. We don't get freaked out if something doesn't work out on our holiday. We just find another adventure. And I love that about Steve. And I realise, looking back, that some of the things that I love about him are actually our ADHD traits.
They're because my partner at the moment, she's not been diagnosed, but every single trait points to it. Like every single trait. She'll leave stuff everywhere. She, to a degree, worse than me. And I do think that part of the reason I was probably attracted was because I kind of understood it. And I think that probably goes across the board. I do then think it would probably relate back to if you have 2 people with ADHD having a child that also has ADHD, it's complicated.
Yeah. In some ways it's complicated, but in other ways it's just really good fun.
Well, that's a good view.
Yeah. It's interesting. Me and Jason have talked about this a lot. Like Jason, my autistic colleague, we shared an office for 2 years. So funny because in some ways we are so different because, I sort of your typical kind of buzzy, loud person with ADHD. He's quiet. He's, he likes his routine, and it was actually really good for us. I think I'm sure he would say the same. I think we're friends as well as colleagues. We got on really, really well, but we really maybe this is why we had to really work to accommodate each other. I think we both. Different. Yeah, and I think we both really learned a lot. And I think because we were interested in neurodivergence in terms of our research as well, I think both went on a bit of a journey together in realising that there's a real strength in working with people who are very different. There's an amazing book called, I'm going to really struggle to remember what it's called now. Matthew Barzun, I think it's called. Oh, I can't remember. How annoying. It's written by a guy who was an advisor to Barack Obama. But anyway, he's talking about how, it'll come back to me later, how important it is in teams to have diversity. And he said, look, we could talk about gender diversity and we could talk about race, but that's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about cognitive diversity. And so in our team at where I work at the University of Glasgow, we've got a big team. There's more than 20 of us. And we really try to think about neurodivergence. We really try to acknowledge the fact that some of us in the team like to be noisy and chatty, and some of us need the exact opposites. How do we accommodate that? Because I really believe in science, and I think in a lot of life, actually, you get the best ideas when you get those different styles of thinking together. But I suspect in families, people usually want to be a bit cozier, so they maybe go for people that are a bit more similar.
Yeah.
But for me, I think in the world, out there in the world, I think it really helps us if we can actually find ways of getting on with people who are extremely different from us.
What do you think is the most fascinating thing that you've learned through your research into the kind of developmental conditions and attachment disorders that arise from abuse? Is there anything that stood out to you and you were like, what? How is that?
Well, I think I've said it already. I mean, that moment of realising that people who've been abused and neglected are many times more likely to be neurodivergent, but the neurodivergence is not caused by the abuse and neglect. I mean, that was like being hit by a train. I mean, it was just like, and it took me, oh my God, it really took me a long time to get my head around what that meant for me as a clinician. And I would say that that's transformed everything I do. So just before we got on the podcast, you were, I can't remember how this came up, but I was talking about you saying, have I ever been asked a question I didn't know the answer to? So years ago, like back in 2007, I published a paper on the genetics of reactive attachment disorder and disinhibited social engagement disorder. I can't even remember how I ended up doing that study. I think it was a friend of mine called Val Murray, who was a geneticist, and she said, look, you should look into this. So I did. We basically used a measure for RAD and DSED in a twin study. And RAD and DSED are the only disorders, as I mentioned before, that are thought to be caused by abuse and neglect. But we found that they were really highly heritable. And so I was asked by this interviewer called Raj Prasad, who was very famous at the time and quite a tough interviewer, you know, what do you make of this? And I had no idea. I was like a fish that's been taken out of water. And I genuinely didn't know the answer. Now I suspect, I still don't know the answer for certain, but, well, we know that among people who've been abused and neglected, only a minority develop RAD or DSED.
Right.
So why? Why do some people who've been abused and neglected get RAD or DSED and some don't? I think it might be because the people who get RAD and DSED are also neurodivergent.
Is that intrinsically like have you found that?
Or
is it just more of a...
There's some... No, we've got... I would say we've got kind of preliminary evidence. That's
right.
a word I can never say. Preliminary evidence. Because we did this study that we did in the prison. The people who had RAD and DSED generally also had many other conditions, and there were often neurodivergence. So, for example, DSED nearly always goes along with ADHD. RAD, I think RAD's much rarer, so I'm less confident about RAD. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an association between RAD and autism. You know, RAD's the one where you get a kind of shutting down of the attachment system. DSED's the one where people become indiscriminate. I've got a colleague, Claire Davison-Jameson, who's a speech and language therapist, and she developed a beautiful model, which we've never managed to get published yet. But her idea is, like, little kids, like, you know, babies, toddlers with ADHD can be quite disinhibited. You know, they do wander off and chat to people in the supermarket, but their mothers check them, their mothers and fathers check them, they go, come on, get back here, you know. She reckons that what happens in typical families is that kids with ADHD get socialised out of being disinhibited. So John Bowlby...
So it's like a learning rather than...
Yeah, it's a learning thing. Yeah. So John Bowlby, who was the kind of father of attachment theory, described how attachment is about being safe. It's about getting close to the herd. So, you know, when a young infant becomes stressed, they'll call out or they'll reach out, and either they'll run to the parent or the parent will come to them, and they'll get picked up, they'll get taken along with the herd. So that's all part of the socialisation as well. You learn that your herd is the safe place. You know, these are your people. And you see that in normal development. So tiny babies can be passed from hand to hand, but toddlers get shy.
And they cry.
They cry, yeah. So they get stranger anxiety. And that's a normal developmental stage. But Claire's hypothesis is that that we socialise our kids into that, you know, and we do that. You know, if our kids are extrovert, we will kind of say, come, like, stop boring that person, you know. They learn, and basically our suggestion is that kids with DSED, because they've been neglected, they just never learn that you don't go to strangers. Mm. So they miss a kind of developmental window, and once they've missed it, they seem to have missed it. You seem to be kind of stuck with it.
And it makes sense, because as a child, your parents, don't go with any stranger. They'll caution you constantly against it. And you would think that would be immersed, you know, by the time you're, 12 years old, you're probably stranger danger.
That's it.
Don't go over there. How would you test for RAD and DSED?
Well, we've got good ways of testing. One of the ways that we've developed is we've got a waiting room observation. I mean, that's just one of the measures, but you can basically see in a clinic waiting room. We used to have a clinic over at York Hill Hospital that had a lift and then a long corridor down to the reception area. There was a little waiting room. So we did this study a number of years ago where we got typically developing children from just ordinary families to come, and then we also got kids that we knew had been abused and neglected and were indiscriminate in their behaviours. And we just looked at the difference so we could try and kind of operationalise it, if you know what I mean. And what we would notice, for me, the surprise was the typically the family, you know, the kids who hadn't been abused and neglected. You see the lift doors open, and these were kids primary school age, and you'd see them chatting away with their parent in the lift. And as soon as they walked down the corridor and clocked, oh, this is a doctor's surgery, they would just go quiet and they would curry up to their parents. They would kind of move in close and they wouldn't say another word. And, you know, we would chat to the parent, we'd welcome, you know, the child, and the child would look all shy.
Don't want to jag in my arm.
Yeah, and often the parent would get quite embarrassed and say, come on, be polite. But we realised that shyness is absolutely normal. That's what, and of course it's attachment behaviour. It's just getting close, and secure children get, you know, they get close and they go quiet and they let mum speak in a new situation. In contrast, the kids with DSED, the abused kids, they would walk out the lift, they'd continue chatting, once I got to know them better, I realised that they would also be nervous. But their nervousness, they would think it was appropriate just to kind of schmooze the stranger.
Mm-hmm. Right, fill the void.
Well,
if
yeah,
there's a silence, fill it.
Kind of control the stranger, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So I've got a video that we did a little experiment actually. It was an adoptive family, and we were trying to kind of understand this behaviour at the time, and they agreed to a bit of an experiment where we videoed. It was a child aged 3 and 4, and they were part of a kind of voluntary organisation. So we got a stranger from the voluntary organisation. We were just videoing, and they arrived, and it was so interesting because these kids went right up to the stranger, and the little girl started playing with her necklace. Whereas my son was a similar age and was very extrovert. So we did a similar experiment with him. And what he did, as soon as the stranger came in, he went quiet. He moved over and started playing with an easel, an artist easel that he hadn't been playing with before. But it meant that he had his back to the stranger, and then he only spoke when he was spoken to. And it was fascinating right in that moment. So there's actually really clear things that you can observe. It's a lack of shyness.
Not really clever. You see, for like a 4-year-old, you wouldn't...
4-year-olds are pretty smart on the whole.
But like, you wouldn't think that they have that level of cognizance that they're able to, you know, if I put my back to a stranger won't talk to me.
I don't think it's about cognition. I think it's instinct, actually.
And where do you draw the line between cognition and instincts?
Well, you can tell. So we've got it's interesting actually. There's an attachment measure called the Manchester Child Attachment Story Task, and it's a doll's house. And what you do is you give the child the beginning of a story that's got a big kind of stress in it, like you're out playing football and suddenly you fall and you hurt your knee and it's bleeding, and then you hand the dolls to the child and you say, "Show me and tell me what happens next." And the securely attached kids will just bring mummy close and she'll sort it out. Kids who are less securely attached may sort it out for themselves, or things might get worse. So yeah, you can rate it. But what I noticed is little kids, so the MCAS, the Manchester Child Attachment Story Task, is aimed at kids aged 4 to 8. Kids of that age, you can see them getting really drawn into the story. It's almost like they're getting drawn in by their belly button, and they grab the toys and they just tell the story. Once they get to 9, they start to involve their frontal lobes. You can see their cognition.
They're thinking.
And there's a tiny little hesitation, and then you can tell that they're telling you what you want to hear. So I think you can tell the difference.
At what point, this might not be something you've studied, but at what point, are you cold, by the way?
No, not at all. No, I'm fine.
I'll give the heating a bash. At what point does a child become cognizant enough to stop or to think about what they're saying? You said around about 9.
Yeah. With attachment, if you're talking about stress, stressful situations, that kind of instinct to kind of move towards your parent, becomes more cognitive around the age of 9.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's probably true for different developmental kind of strands of development. So moral development, for example, I mean, there's an amazing program actually that I just watched a little clip of the other day called The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds.
I've heard of that.
Oh,
or did you just tell me about that?
No, it wasn't me. No.
Oh, I've heard of
somebody else. Yeah. It's a guy called Sam Wass who I've been collaborating with, but he was actually the developmental psychologist in it, and he was saying recently that actually they only showed the fairly good stuff. There's some really dark stuff because 4-year-olds can be horrible to each other. But it's so interesting because if you actually stop and watch them, the amount of thought that they put into things like, is that wee person upset? Should I go and sort them out? Well, but actually they weren't very nice to me yesterday, so maybe I won't. So there's lots of thinking going on at really quite a young age. And then alongside that, there are more kind of instinctual behaviours that, unconscious behaviours. I mean, we have unconscious behaviours right throughout our life. So fight, flight and freeze would be an example. That's just, we don't stop and think about, like if a lion, came into the room, we would just run. We wouldn't stop and think whether it was a nice or a nasty lion.
I think I'd freeze. Like just thinking about the way that I would operate, I would probably either freeze or flight. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't.
I have no idea what I would do. I really hope it never happens.
But I think like if there's a lion there and you're thinking, well, the first one of us to move probably going to get eaten, I'd be like, I'll freeze until it goes for you.
Yeah. But I think my point really was that I don't think either of us would think.
Yeah, I know it's instinctual.
Yeah.
Where, see for any people that are listening to this that might be considering becoming parents, but do have those stresses of stranger danger and don't go outside and play because you might get snatched and don't cross the road. And what advice would you give to them?
My advice would be build yourself a village. And I'm not kidding. I think that is honestly what to do. So one of my neighbours did that actually. She's got 3 kids and her gorgeous wee boys, heading up towards 2 now. But what she did when he was a baby, we've got a kind of neighbourhood reading group. And she actually set up a little channel called Aaron's Village. And she would just text of a morning, because, some of the folk in the group are retired, or there's a couple of women who are not working. And she would just text and say, look, I'm going out for a walk with Aaron, or I need to go and pick up the girls. Is anyone free? That's what we need to be doing. We need to get back to trusting people. We need to get back to pulling in support. So what I would say to parents and prospective parents is shore up your support. I was actually on a train just a couple of weeks ago and this really depressed me. It was a long train journey and there were 2 kind of 20-something women in front of me. They were lovely, but I suspect one of them was pregnant. And they started talking about what's it going to be like to be a parent. And one of them said to the other, "You'll be a fantastic parent." And she said, "Oh, that's nice. I just want to make her nice." And it chilled me to the bone. And I nearly said something. I thought, no, I'm not involved in their conversation. It's literally just had my earphone just happened to come out, so I didn't say anything. But what I would love to have said was, "Listen, honey, you can't make her anything. She's herself. And what you need to understand is that you need as many people around you to support you, and then she'll get to know all of them, and then that'll help her understand that humanity is a wide range, and she'll learn a wide range of things. But you have a lot less power than you think." That's what I wanted to say. Because I think one of the reasons that we blame parents is because we think that they've got the power to create their children. And they just don't. I love that. There's a beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran. I don't know if you've heard it. Our children are not our children. They are the sons and the daughters of life coming to itself. They come through you, but they are not from you. Yeah. And it finishes off with, you can try to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you.
I think what really, because when Hannah let me know that you were coming in, I started thinking about the differences between my brother. I have a brother, older brother and little sister. Polar opposites. Mm-hmm. And we've been raised in essence the same way.
There you go.
But wildly different. Yep. So different. Yep. I do believe that there's, in essence, I mean, you can obviously raise a kid to know what is right and wrong. Yes.
Now, apparently that's been shown. Apparently what parents do give to their kids is moral development and politics. Everything else.
Yeah, politics is a big one, especially as you get old. It's weird. I'm at the age now where people will go to dinners and they'll talk about politics, and you can see that it's their dad or mum through them. Yeah, you can see it, and a lot of people through doing the podcast, I get a lot of different perspectives, and I try and listen as much as possible, and especially when I edit them or listen to them back, and I'll take things, and a lot of people say things without actually researching it. Yeah, it is interesting the things that we take from our parents, and also the fact that a lot of people don't. When they get to a certain threshold, they just stop learning. They stop growing. I think it's 24. People really, they take what their parents say and they adopt that as their mantra through life, and they don't grow anymore. And it's really scary.
It's really scary. And I guess that's back to that whole thing of, for me, I love to surround myself by people with different perspectives. And I mean, none of us are that brilliant at it. It's always more comfortable to be with someone who's like you. But I do, as a scientist particularly, it's so important to be challenged.
Yeah.
Because you can be wrong, of course.
Yeah, and if you're challenged, you'll grow.
Exactly.
Do you think that part of the reason, and I don't want to say issue because I don't want to start blaming parents, but do you think parents can be sometimes too soft and they don't challenge their children?
I don't know. I don't think that is a problem of parents. I think that's a problem of our society. So, I mean, there's things that I did with my kids that probably would be really frowned upon now. So, like, my kids were both riding their bikes to school at 10. I have a feeling that if I was a parent of a 10-year-old now, I'd probably get quite a lot of kind of approbation from other parents for that. Do you know what I mean? So I think as a parent, from what you were saying before, I'm assuming you're not a parent yet.
No, not yet.
But one of the things I think that was interesting being a parent is as soon as you're a parent, it's as if the eyes of the world are on you. And maybe that's not a bad thing, as long as they're on you supportively. So I don't think it's so much that it's parents' attitudes, it's society's attitudes are so
skewed.
Are so skewed. And also that, that thing that you mentioned right at the beginning, social media mentions all the bad things. It's like, I remember, right, we used to cycle down the Kelvin Walkway every day, and we're so lucky. We lived just near the Maryhill Locks, and we could literally we could drop our kids at Downhill Primary School, as was then, and it was really safe. It was lovely. And then there was a young tragedy. A young woman got killed. She was murdered, and literally on our bike route. But I mean, I suppose it's working in mental health. It's so blooming obvious to me. I mean, it actually turned out quite quickly. It was actually somebody that she knew who'd been stalking her. So it's tragic. It didn't increase me or my kids' risk of being stabbed at all. Not at all. So it didn't stop me cycling to work. But the number of people who said, how can you take your children down there? So I think what I would say to parents is, build yourself a broad and diverse village of trusted people who can actually support you. And if people offer you help, take it. Got a family member who's Albanian. She's an in-law family member. And she took her kids back to Albania last summer. One of her best friends said, "You're just not Albanian anymore." And she's like, "What?" She said, "You don't ask for help." And I thought that was a beautiful thing. It's like she was living in a block of flats, and she quickly learned to go and ask for sugar, even if she didn't need sugar, because that was the way to help her neighbours realise that she trusted them.
Right, yeah, it's different culture.
But I think that's actually kind of, I think that is actually the kind of natural human state. The natural human state is we're herd animals.
We want to be with others.
We need to be with others.
Yeah.
So actually, and this is something I've been reading a lot about. There's an amazing evolutionary biologist called Sarah Blaffer Hardy. One of her books is called Mothers and Others, and it's all about the importance of, she calls it alloparents, and it's people who don't have who don't have children who can help parents. And unfortunately, I think in our society, alloparents end up being nursery staff or school teachers. But what she argues, and it's so obvious once you read her books, we have very, very vulnerable kids. You know, they can't cling on. They need a lot of help. You need to have your hands full when you've got a baby. Like, unlike our ape cousins who've got they've got hairy chests, so their kids can literally cling on, so they've got their hands free. We don't. We tend to breed really quickly, so we've often got 2 under 2. And what she points out is that a woman with 2 kids under 2 cannot feed herself and the children. She needs help. So she talks about cooperative breeders. We're a species of cooperative breeders, unlike chimpanzees, who for various reasons are not cooperative breeders. But all of our psychology is built on looking at the other great apes, and she points out we shouldn't be looking at the other great apes. We're much more like marmosets or some kind of species of birds. But so we need alloparents. We need people to support our parenting. So the natural human state is to actually be seeking help as parents to support your child.
I do think that there's 2 things. One is that I think parents live in a heightened sense of anxiety through the news, essentially.
Yeah.
The difference, and through doing social media, you learn this quite quick. Negative stuff gets clicked on twice as much. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to, I could go onto the Chisholm Hunter YouTube channel, which is based on watches, and I could say, this watch sucks. And I know that it will get twice the amount of views just because it's negative. People are attracted to it. So there's a heightened sense of anxiety. And also because people are so, on their phones or screens or social media, they're on it all the time, they actually don't communicate or don't have the community around them that could help. And it's kind of sad because I see it in myself. Like, I've got neighbours that are really nice guys and girls, and I don't know them. Yeah. I really don't know. And they live there. They live 10 metres away.
That's right.
And a lot of people will do that. Whereas before, like, I remember talking to my parents and they were, we were at hers across the road and we were at his down there. And how did you meet them?
That's right.
They live beside me, so I met them. Whereas now you would never.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
And I think it's interesting because my husband's really, I mean, he's a community worker. That's a lot of what he does. And it's something that he's really opened my eyes to over the years, but it is really simple stuff. But back to your question about what would I advise people who are thinking about having kids, I would say build up your community. And I think the way to build up your community is, you think about those, if you're thinking about having kids or you're already pregnant, get to know your neighbours, and do it by knocking on the door and saying, listen, this is really embarrassing. I'm about to make pancakes. I've got no sugar. Can you lend me some? Or invite them over for pizza, or do what my American husband does, which is you make cookies and somebody new moves into the neighbourhood. You make cookies and you take them a batch, invite them to have a pizza with you. Yeah. I mean, genuinely build up your friendship network so that when you've got kids, you've got a family. And when they say, I'll babysit, say, yeah, thanks. Yeah. Come and watch my telly. Yeah. And I'll go to the pub.
Yeah, and get a little bit of relief.
Seriously.
Maybe that's why the issues incur, like the parents incur those. You were talking about the kind of intrusive thoughts before of someone coming up and saying, I've never told anyone this, but I had to lock myself in the toilet. I mean, if you've not slept for 3 days and you've not eaten and you've not done this and they can't stop crying, and like, you need relief. You need I'm going to go for a pint for an hour and a half with the boys and talk about nonsense that doesn't have any relation to the kids, and then I'll come back and I'll be a bit more diffused.
Exactly it. And, so I think I mentioned to you, before I went into psychiatry, I worked in Guatemala. I just had a travel bug and I got a job. I was the GP for an orphanage and the surrounding villages. And the surrounding villages were living in extreme poverty. They had no latrines, there was lots of malnutrition, blah, blah, blah. But I would go and do a postnatal visit after a woman had a baby, and you could almost guarantee she'd be having a nice snooze in her hammock. And somebody else in the family would be holding the baby. Yeah. And it could be granddad, it could be the older sibling, but she had a lot of help, and that is normal. So it would be the same in the Caribbean. Do you know, my extended family are from the Bahamas, and what I really notice when I go there is that everybody has much more in the way of kind of intergenerational relationships. Yeah. So if there's a baby born, the local teenagers will get to know the baby, and they'll sometimes be holding the baby, and they'll be going and cutting their auntie's fence, and her baby will be there, and then they'll be going clubbing. Yeah. Do you know? So there's just much more kind of comfort around people of different ages and community, yeah. And so it builds trust. So you're never going to be left without a babysitter.
It's interesting that I went to Sulawesi, it's beside Borneo. It's like a really weird country. It's just beside Borneo. Stunning. If you've got the travel bug, you'd love it. And a lot of them live in poverty, like real poverty. But they're like the happiest people I've ever met. And again, you'll have 8 of them living in what we would consider as like a shack. Mm-hmm. They're so happy, and they all help the family.
That's it.
So like if one person has a kid, they've got their grandparents are looking after them, and they'll go out, or the children of, it's all interlinked. Whereas I think in the UK, probably Americans are like this as well. We've really lost it. Like, I think we really have lost it.
Yeah, I think we really have. And it frightens me in some ways. I was just thinking, gosh, I can feel my mood dipping here, because I just think, what do we do? Like, how do we knit it? But then, so I've lived in Maryhill or Gilshy Hill for, gosh, nearly 30 years actually. And just about 3 years ago, this same mum that I was talking about, the one that said, she wanted to set up a WhatsApp village for her baby, she suggested this book group, women's book group. And because my husband knows everyone in the community, he basically said, oh, why then, Angela, do you know about the book group? So we've ended up with this amazing multi-age, multi-social class group of women, and it's really enhanced our neighbourhood. So, I mean, literally, I think I mentioned to you earlier, at Hogmanay, like half the neighbourhood was in our house, and it was such a banging party. But that's because we've kind of gradually, over a few years, and I would say it's maybe taken 3 years, but we've developed a really, really supportive network. I mean, a really supportive network. And we've got a couple of little WhatsApp groups, actually. One's the reading group, and then my husband's on a group called the Fochers, which is they kind of go and do things like foching, litter picking. It's the Friends of Gilshy Hill. But it's things, I mean, literally you can post, like, oh my God, I've forgotten that I haven't got anyone, I'm away for the night. Can anyone take my dog?
Yeah.
And somebody will take our dog. We've never had to put our dog in kennels. So it's possible to build that.
It's also, what's a really interesting stat is that the key indicator for longevity isn't diet. It isn't if you're a smoker or a non-smoker. It isn't if you do exercise or not. It's social groups. So if you don't have friends, you will die earlier. That's the statistic.
Well, it makes perfect sense, because we are supposed to live in community. It's the natural human state. And it's why I push back about Elon Musk being successful, because me and my husband Steve talk about this a lot. He's American, as I mentioned, and white American, and in kind of the white American culture, when he was growing up, the only thing that a man was supposed to do was get rich. Didn't matter if you'd been to university, didn't matter if you were married, it's just rich, 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 rich. And I really do think that is, and I'm not really talking about the politics of it, I'm talking about the anthropology of it, really. But if you're focused on individual gain, you're going to be less focused on community.
Well, that's an issue, and that's a sacrifice that a lot of people make that are highly successful, is they drop their community.
That's it.
And you see it in them.
You see it.
Because they have all the money when they're 60 years old, but they have no friends and no one to share it with. It's interesting. I was doing a shoot in Glencoe And I was talking to a friend, and he gets invited on a lot of trips with watch brands. And the watch brands will put them up in this incredible hotel, and they'll really spoil you. And he was sitting there in this hotel in Monaco that was like, £5,000 a night that the brand had paid for. And he said, I've got no one to share this with. I'm on my own. Why am I here?
That's so sad.
And it's really
but that's
sad.
It, isn't it?
He was like, I wish my girlfriend was here because I've got no one to share this with. And he's like, and to a certain degree, the older I get, the more I realize that it's not really about the place or where you go or how much you pay for something. It's about who you surround yourself with.
It's about who you do it with. And I mean, who doesn't love a lovely spa break?
Yeah.
But you want to have a spa break with a friend,
Yeah.
don't you? You want to sit in the pool with your wee glass of Prosecco chatting. My daughter, Ellie, she was in San Francisco for a number of years and she worked in management consultancy. She had a highly paid job. She had a lot of very, very wealthy friends, lots of tech bros and those kind of folk. I mean, she had an amazing time and she met some incredible people. So, I don't want to put any shade on that. But she talked about having COVID. She was really very, very ill. And she put a WhatsApp around her neighbours and said, look, I'm really ill. Could anybody bring me some food? And a woman said, yeah, I'll bring you some soup. Put a basket outside her door. And there was soup and a couple of other things. And then there was her bank details to pay her back.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
Yeah, wow.
And Ellie's the kind of person who... I mean, she is good at friendships and community and she's an amazing cook. And I'm sure that woman will have had her cookies already. Do you know? And she won't have got been asked for a receipt. So there's something really, I mean, to me, that just shows a real fragmentation. There's something really, really toxic about that, isn't there?
I feel like it's in the UK specifically. Like, I'm really lucky that I've done a load of travel for my job, and I don't think I've ever been anywhere quite like that. Like, Scotland is incredible, like really is, and the people in Scotland are incredible, but it's fragmented. The entirety of everything across the UK is fragmented right now because people have different opinions, but they have to voice them. And then as a result, I think you get people that, this guy votes this way, so I'm not going to talk to him, or this guy likes him, so I'm not going to talk to him, and this guy does this. And I do think there's the fragmentation is the right word. Yeah.
So there's an interesting statistic that I came across recently that suicide rates are going up.
Oh, exponentially.
In Britain, Australia and the US, and they're stable or falling in other countries.
So interestingly, Australia have just banned social media under 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah.
I really wonder, because if you look at the introduction of Facebook, which was the original kind of, it was MSN before that. I'm old enough to know that, but
yeah, I remember MSN.
Yeah, but it was Facebook. If you look at the statistics, as social media has grown, the curve is.
I don't think it's just social media though. I think it's an individualist society actually, because I mean, the lowest suicide rates are in the Mediterranean countries, and they've got plenty of social media, but they've also got really great extended family and community. So, I mean, I don't want to dismiss social media, but I sometimes wonder if it's a symptom rather than a cause. Because, let's face it, if you've got, hundreds of cousins and you're having a great time in community, then you're probably going to be less tempted to go on your phone. So it's difficult to know which is the chicken, which is the egg.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You've got that social network, so you don't need to go on social media.
That's exactly it. And I mean, so I mean, in the global south, where there's definitely less use of social media, yes, suicide rates are stabilising or going down, but it's not just in the global south. It's also in Mediterranean countries, which will have just as much access to it. So it's not I don't think it's a direct relationship between suicide and social media. I think it's much more, my gut feeling is it's probably community. And in fact, my colleague Dennis Ugrin, he did an amazing study because he's a suicide and self-harm expert. And he got money to go and spend a month with a clinical psychologist called Emma Woodhouse with a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania called the Hadza people. And they did standardise mental health assessments on more than 100 kids. And what they found was that the symptoms were exactly the same kind of distribution of symptoms and traits as you would get in the West. But you wouldn't have been given, hardly any of those kids would have got diagnoses because these symptoms and traits weren't causing them a problem. And the reason they weren't causing them a problem, well, there was lots of reasons. One was that They were generally not having to sit in school 5 hours a day or whatever. There were little boys were out hunting, little girls were hanging about with their mums and grands, digging up tubers and getting berries and stuff like that. They had a really much more free range childhood. Parents, adults, worked about 4 or 5 hours a day, and the rest of the time they generally sat around and chatted. And all of the children after the age of about 2 were out there and visible to all of the adults. So, I mean, I think that's a really important thing, because adults would, and kids would realise that kids come in all shapes and sizes. So there wouldn't be kind of the same expectation to be normal. But generally they were much more mentally healthy.
That's interesting, that, isn't it?
It's really interesting.
I feel like the social media sphere has made us more antisocial.
I think it's probably made things worse, but personally, my gut feeling tells me that the kind of disintegration of community was probably what allowed that to happen. That's my hunch.
How do you think that we can bring that back?
How do we bring it back?
Yeah.
Well, just like I was saying, I think a lot of people are talking about this now. It's not just me. I mean, people like Darren McGarvey have been talking more about, I don't know if you've read his book, The Social Distance Between Us. He'd be a great guest. You should get him on the podcast, actually.
I'll write that down, The Social Distance Between Us.
Yeah.
I've heard of that book.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah. Be easier to get me than it'll be to get Garvey. He did the Reith lectures on Radio 4 a couple of years ago. He's amazing. But so I think a lot of people are really noticing this problem with kind of fragmentation of communities. And I mean, it sounds like a soft thing, but I really don't think it is. I think we really urgently need to be focusing on much more local support. So I don't know if you've heard about this thing about like 15-minute communities. Is that a term you've heard? It's just something I've heard the last couple. I mean, I don't know that much about it, but it's a term that I've heard bandied about. It's the idea that we should live in communities where everything you need is within a 15-minute walk. You know, and I mean, if you think about where are the nice places to live, like here where you are and where I live in Maryhill, I mean, there's going to be a school within a 15-minute walk. There's going to be shops within a 15-minute walk. There's going to be nice parks and green spaces within that 15 minutes. So actually, you know, you could easily spend a month, if you had to, only within that area. And if that were possible, if more of us were doing that, we'd end up with more amenities in our local areas, and we would end up having much more local support.
That's interesting.
For me, I think and I think the thing that we can all do now that costs nothing is, I'm not kidding, just get to know our neighbours and really be active about it.
It is interesting because, like, I was thinking about this the other day. When I first started doing photography and video, my kind of USP is that because I failed at everything, so I had to do something. So I would get up at 2 a.m. and I would drive 2 hours to Glencoe, climb a hill for sunrise and get all this stuff. But
must have been beautiful.
It was stunning. But I would always get to the M&S garage, and there would always be the same lady there that would serve me.
Oh, that's lovely. The one on Great Western Road.
Yeah, there would always be this older lady that would serve me, and through time and time again, she, you know, why are you here at 4 a.m?
Where are you going? Where are you going next?
And I really got to know her, and like it became part of the routine, and it actually kind of made the experience what it was. So it is possible to do it, but you're right. That's an interesting point. If you're 15 minutes from something and you live within that radius, you're going to go to the same spots, you're going to meet the same people, you're going to do the same thing.
I mean, it's been really, for me, it's enriched my life so much to be married to someone who is so focused on community. I don't think Steve would mind me saying he had a really quite an abusive experience as a kid. They had a difficult experience in America, but he happened to be lucky enough to live in small town America where the school was amazing. And there was also a real kind of interplay between the school and the community. So the guy who ran the hardware store, where at the age of like 14, 15, he was working on a Saturday, was also the running coach at the school, which got Steve into running. So he ended up being like the captain of the running club. He didn't have a particularly, I mean, he would have been the first person to go to university in his family probably. But the guy at the hardware store said, do you know that you can get scholarships just for your community work? And so he ended up getting scholarships and going to university. So he is really passionate about community because it totally saved him. Do you know, he could have he had a really good friend at school who ended up a cocaine dealer, do you know?
Yeah.
And went to prison. And he's okay now, actually. He's doing all right. But, you know, I mean, Steve could easily have had that life. So he's really, really opened my eyes to how important community is. And everyone knows him in our, you know, you can't walk the dog without someone going, Stevie! You know? But it means that, you know, like the other day I was sitting working from home and I went to walk the dog and there was a guy who I'd seen around, but I'd never really greeted. And he said, my wife just died. And then we started talking and it turned out that my husband knew him. His name's Fred. And literally we had a really lovely, quite intimate sort of 3-minute conversation. And then my husband was able to go at the funeral. And that's a good neighbourhood. Like Fred, I've actually got to know him quite well since I've bumped into him quite a few times. He doesn't have any family.
Yeah.
And but it's the kind of neighbourhood where he's been able to kind of bring people around him, you know. So
I've got faith. I think people do. It swings and roundabouts, these things. I mean, we were talking about clubbing earlier. I think that like you're seeing this pivot towards no clubs.
Yeah.
Whereas what I think is going to happen is hopefully it'll swing back.
I hope so.
You hope so.
We had so much more fun, didn't we?
So much fun. Yeah. Go to sub club.
Yeah.
On it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it swings and I think people they're starting to wake up to it now. There's a fragmented society, but I do feel more people, hopefully, will take that advice and start to swing the other way. I just realised the time.
What time is it?
It's 4:15. So
wow, we've been gabbing for 2 hours.
Well, listen, Helen, thank you so much for coming in and spending the time.
I really enjoyed it.
It's good,
really
right?
Enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.